Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is here, and it is the first Phase 4 movie, technically the second, but the first one that actually moves the Marvel Cinematic Universe forward, and I was pleasantly surprised by this movie.
Glad I was right.
This is my review, which is mostly spoiler free, but I will have a section towards the end where I discuss the ending and not one but two post-credit scenes, and so there will be a spoiler warning for that towards the end of this video. First off, I want to start by saying that this movie feels different, and it feels like something we haven't seen before in the MCU, and those are all positives. This movie is part martial arts movie and part family drama, and I loved both those aspects in this movie, and they were the most strongest aspects that this movie had. This movie follows the origin story of Shang-Chi, or shall I say Sean, which is what he's called at the beginning of this movie, and it also fleshes out some more information about the Ten Rings, which we do first see in the first Iron Man movie, but it is nice that we have some more information and we learn a bit more about the Legend of the Ten Rings. This movie has three really great things going for it, and that is the cast, the fight choreography, and the storytelling. But first I want to talk about the cast. Shang-Chi is played by Simu, and I hadn't heard about him before this movie, but he brings the character of Shang-Chi to life, and I'm not too familiar on that character anyway, but I thoroughly enjoyed him in this movie, and he perfectly bounces off Awkwafina's character Katie. I'm one of those people who were a bit like, oh, Awkwafina, is she just gonna be the character who is just there to bring the humor, to tell the jokes? But she has kind of a story arc to her. She has personality in this movie like she does in her other movies, but she isn't just there to tell the funny lines. She isn't just there to give a funny joke to make the audience laugh. She actually has something throughout the whole movie, and in the third act she does something, and she's included in it throughout the whole movie. She is there.
We make a good team!
And I just loved her character's dynamic with Shang-Chi's. I'm not afraid to say that they are probably my favourite MCU duo now. No hate to all these other MCU duos, but they really just bring the action, bring the fun, bring the humour. That humour isn't lost throughout this movie, and in the fight sequences the humour is still there, and that is one thing that I like. I don't like it being too serious, and I don't like it being too funny, but I feel like this movie has a complete balance between the humour and the action, the seriousness as well as the lightheartedness.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
As well as those two actors, you have Tony Leung, Michelle Yeoh, and Meng'er Zhang, and I just want to say, if I pronounce any of those names wrong, which I'm pretty sure I did, I apologise. All those actors in this movie were really good in their roles and as their characters, and of course Michelle Yeoh, she's gonna be great. I love every movie that I've seen her in. I want to talk about Tony Leung in this movie. He plays Shang-Chi's father and the villain in this, and honestly, I feel like this is the first Marvel movie that actually gave the villain enough backstory and enough information for us to see that yes, he's the villain, not just show up in the last 20 minutes of the movie, and actually made this villain really relatable, and we actually care about this villain. At times I felt like I was kind of rooting for him, with what he was saying. I was like, oh, I wonder if that is true, and I wonder if he can succeed. And it wasn't just him as a villain, it was kind of his villain arc and his relationship with his son Shang-Chi. And so Shang-Chi, he's been given this destined plan and this destined path, but he doesn't want that for himself. But you kind of have the overbearing father who is building him up to be kind of an assassin, and pretty much is an assassin, but he doesn't want that. And so you have that struggle, that power dynamic between the two. And I really like the tension in these Marvel movies and the villains, where it comes from relations to the hero. And so in Endgame with Thanos and Gamora's death was the one that actually hit the most for me, and I think I probably cried a little bit when she died, because that was a dynamic between her and the villain Thanos that I never thought I was going to see, and one that I didn't think I would understand, but I did. And so in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, with the dynamic between Shang-Chi and his father, I was really relating to these characters, and this is one of the Marvel movies where you can kind of sympathize a little bit and root for the villain just as much as you are rooting for and caring for the main character, for the superhero. Now I want to talk about the director's choice of how he told this story and the storytelling throughout this movie. I really liked the storytelling in this movie, and I loved how it was told. This story and this movie is built up from legend and from lore. I mean, it's pretty much in the title, The Legend of the Ten Rings. And so throughout this movie there are some flashbacks where we kind of see the history of the Ten Rings, where we see the history of Shang-Chi and his upbringing and his past, and I really like those details in this movie. And I felt showing us it in that order, where we see kind of a flashback, then we're to present day, and then when something is becoming significant in present day, we see why it is so significant from the past in a flashback. But I just liked how it kind of broke up the tension a little bit in a good way. I just want to say that the cinematography as well, there are some really beautiful shots in this movie, and it feels realistic but then also like mystical at the same time. I just liked how this movie showed the history and the legend and the lore of the Ten Rings, the past of this family, the past of Shang-Chi's character, the past of the father's character. It also pushed us forward in present day, pushed us forward in the MCU, into phase 4, but I just liked how this story was told overall. Now I want to talk about the fight sequences, the action, the fight choreography in this movie, and that is probably one of my biggest praises of this movie, is how they did the fighting, how they did the action scenes. And with every Marvel movie, there's a bunch of CGI and there's a bunch of people who are magical, for, like shooting lasers, shooting out magic, shooting out webs. And so with this movie, it felt a lot more grounded. It felt a lot more grounded in reality. There was martial arts, there was kung fu, there was fighting, hand-to-hand combat, and it felt realistic and it felt more real. That it felt like this was like something that could happen in reality, because it does happen in reality. This is something you can actually do instead of shooting out lasers and magic. The fighting is really complemented by the music, like it kind of like hits with the beats, and that's always something that I really like. And I love the MCU and I do love these big fight scenes, but my favourite fight scenes, or my favourite type of fighting, is when it's really close and it is like hand-to-hand combat where they are actually throwing punches and kicking people. And that's why, like, when Black Widow left and like after her film, I was like, yes, this is like the fighting that I've missed. And so I was sad that I wouldn't get like that type of fighting again. But then with Shang-Chi, in like the first act and the second act, all the fighting is hand-to-hand combat, not so like magical and mystical. But then, like with MCU movies, it does then become like out of this world, non-realistic. This isn't like, this can't happen in real life. And that is probably one of the weaknesses of this movie, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. It's a great movie, and up until the third act, the final big fight, I don't want to say that is a really big negative to this movie, because up until that point it didn't really feel like a Marvel movie, and I'm saying that as a positive because it felt so different and it felt so unique and not like something we have seen before in the MCU. But then you come to the final fight, you come to act 3, you come to like the ending, and it just gets really big and really like out there, not realistic, and so it felt like it was a small story. But then you come to the final fight and there's so much going on that you can kind of get lost in it. I didn't know where to look. There were so many like groups split up, like doing different things. Who did I want to pay more attention to? What was going on? And because of the CGI is great in this. I don't want to say it was bad, like with the 10 rings like going all flown around, using that power, fighting with the 10 rings, like that is really cool, and it looks really cool. And so I'm not saying the big final scene is bad and that it really does take away from this movie. I'm just saying that it went from something small to something really big, a lot of moving parts, so you don't really know where to look. Biggest strength is in its hand-to-hand combat, but then when it does like become more of a Marvel movie, where it feels more of a Marvel movie, throughout the story, like throughout the movie, there are Easter eggs, there are like cameos, and so you're like, yeah, this is a Marvel movie. But if you just take them out, it doesn't really feel like that. It feels like something we haven't seen before in Marvel. But you get to the final fight, you get to the big where they need to like throw down, then it does feel like a normal Marvel movie. Not a total negative, but not one of its positives either. But overall, I did really like this movie, and I do recommend and encourage you going and seeing this. From watching the trailer, it doesn't really seem like much, but after watching this movie, like I went in with no expectations, and now I've come out and I'm just like, I kind of really want to watch it again, and I literally watched it yesterday. This movie is kind of like Black Panther, where it was so like history making and groundbreaking, having a Black African American play a main character, play a superhero, and like the whole cast be Black African Americans. And just like with Shang-Chi, where it's an all Asian cast and you have him as the leading role, as the main character, as the superhero, this is what I want to see. I want to see this new stuff. I'm tired of all these white dudes. I want culture, I want new, I want fresh. And that being said, I can't wait to see Simu, Leung and Awkwafina again in the MCU, and I can't wait to see them interact with other MCU characters. That's a duo I want to see again. But now I want to get to the spoiler section of this video, because I want to talk about that ending, and I want to talk about the 2 post-credit scenes. I don't have too much to say about the ending of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, but oh my god, I love that Awkwafina got to have kind of like that hero moment. Like, she was so important in the final battle, and I loved that for her. You really saw like her character arc go from like the beginning of like, I just want to be a valet driver, I just want to do me, I don't want to like continue, like when I get good at something I don't want to do it anymore than just being good. She literally learned like 1 week ago, or like 1 day ago, learned how to shoot a bow and arrow, and then she takes down the big whatever that is, dragon monster type thing. And like that's where some of like the CGI and like the really big scale of it gets a little bit confusing, where they're like riding dragons and you're kind of like, did you need to include this? Like, was that important? But like as it goes on and there is some like explanation to like, oh, if this happens to that dragon, then we are screwed. And so that it like does get better as you watch on. But now I want to talk about those post-credit scenes. And so the first post-credit scene, huge Marvel cameos. You've got the Hulk, or should I say Bruce Banner, and you've got Captain Marvel. And I'm a little bit confused. I may have missed something where there was an explanation to this. But in Endgame, Bruce Banner and the Hulk fused together. Like, I thought they couldn't be separated. He learned to like be as the Hulk but also have his Bruce Banner mind. But then in this post-credit scene, he is Bruce Banner. So I don't know if there was something in between where it explained him, where he can change back to Bruce Banner. So this could just be a really bad misconception from me. Then Captain Marvel, oh, she's got long hair again. Wong explaining the 10 rings, not knowing the origin of them. Like, where did they come from? What were they like forged from? And so, woo, the 10 rings will return. It says that. It doesn't say Shang-Chi, so will he return? Simu Liu and Awkwafina coming back again in the MCU. I obviously knew that they wouldn't have just been in one movie and that was it. So I'm excited to see them again. But then the second post-credit scene with his sister, what the heck? Throughout the movie, she was kind of like in his shadow, like the father's shadow, obviously, but a little bit to the background of Shang-Chi, but obviously it was his movie. And so in the second movie, we are going to see her a lot more. And her post-credit scene shows that she's taken over her father's empire and she's like having girls and boys train together to become assassins. But is she bad then? Did she take over his empire as a good thing, or because she wanted to be, like, she wants to be the master of the 10 rings? I don't know. But that's all my thoughts on those post-credit scenes and the ending. I really did like this movie. I encourage everyone to go and watch it. But that's it for my review of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the 10 Rings. I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. I really did like this, and there was only a little bit of flaw towards the end where it got too big and too MCU-like. But thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave it a like and subscribe for more. Bye!